And some information about what makes people happy. Someone wrote that they're coming in from Durham and they finally found some toilet paper. So kudos to you. We have lots of people logging in from all over the Triangle. Oh, and it's very sweet to hear that TLC offering this event has made someone happy this week, and hiking at Brumley has also made you happy. Welcome. A lot of people said that they're grateful for the rain last night and having some open spaces to enjoy some cycling and hiking. So welcome everyone. I'm really excited to have you all here. As you probably figured out, I am your host for our conservation conversation. I am Casey Terrian and I am TLC's development manager. In the wake of the rapidly changing COVID-19 pandemic, we hope that you are taking care of yourselves during this time. In order to continue practicing social distancing while also connecting with you, TLC is excited to introduce its virtual series, Conservation Conversations. Every Wednesday evening through April, we will host a guest speaker who will share information about the work they are doing to make the Triangle a healthier and more vibrant region. You will have an opportunity to connect with the speaker through the Q&A section. Please take a moment to locate this button on the bottom of your screen of the webinar. It will say Q&A. Please submit all of your questions through this feature. We may not be able to answer all of your questions in the time allotted, but please submit them. You may also send us questions via email to advancement@triangleland.org. Please note that, like many of you, TLC staff and guest speakers are logging in remotely, so bear with us as the internet might be slower than normal. You might hear an occasional dog bark or even a cat meow, and you might also hear children, partners, or roommate voices. As you might know, Triangle Land Conservancy, or TLC, was founded in 1983 by a group of dedicated citizens who were concerned about balancing growth and conservation of open space in the Triangle region. Together, with thousands of members, we've protected over 20,000 acres of land and 141 miles of stream across Wake, Orange, Durham, Johnston, Lee, and Chatham counties. TLC strives to create a healthier and more vibrant Triangle region by safeguarding clean water, protecting natural habitats, supporting local farms and food, and connecting people with nature through land protection and stewardship, catalyzing community action and collaboration. Tonight, I am joined by my colleagues, Sandy Sweitzer, Executive Director, and Eliza Lawdley, Farm Manager at Bailey and Sarah Williamson Nature Preserve. Sandy joined TLC in July of 2013 as Director of Development and became the Executive Director in April 2015. She brings over 30 years of nonprofit experience to TLC, including 20 years in Durham. Sandy has experience in conservation from 5 years as Associate Director of Philanthropy for the Nature Conservancy North Carolina chapter. She has also worked locally for the Durham County Library, where she led the effort to establish the Durham Library Foundation. As Farm Manager at Bailey and Sarah Williamson Nature Preserve, Eliza recruits and coordinates beginning farmers with a focus on regenerative farming practices. A Durham native, Eliza has worked with a number of local agricultural organizations in the Triangle over the last decade, including Soul Food Mobile Farm, Low Mo Market, Interfaith Food Shuttle, Bee Downtown, and the Hub Farm. Eliza is also the owner of Panther Creek Farm, a 28-acre agroforestry farm in East Durham County that she has developed with her family since 2014. In addition to being TLC's farm manager, she is a member of the Capital Area Food Network and is working on a master's degree in landscape architecture at NC State University's College of Design. Sandy and Eliza, the webinar is now yours.
So I think Eliza's going to go next. I think.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Eliza Lawdley. We're working through a few technological glitches on our end, so thank you for bearing with us. I wanted to quickly introduce myself, and I'll let Sandy talk a bit about the history of the Triangle Lane Conservancy. So thank you for that kind introduction, Casey. So my background started with a giant red school bus called Soul Food Mobile Farm. I like to joke that this is where my farming career got started. Soul Food Mobile Farm was a mobile greenhouse that I ran with 3 colleagues in 2011 until 2014. We tricked out this bus to be a mobile greenhouse. So we actually ripped out the roof of this old Durham Public School bus and put in plexiglass and drove around the country planting community gardens. So my background was really hyper urban and really intense vegetable gardening. We visited 34 states on this trip with Soul Food, visiting over 51 gardens and farms, which was an incredible experience for me, jumping into agriculture. After returning to Durham, I worked with a local farmers market called Lomo Market. I managed a number of gardens with the Interfaith Food Shuttle, and I was the director of community partnerships for Be Downtown and worked closely with the Durham Public School Hub Farm. So I want to just say thank you all for joining us this evening to let me share a bit about my excitement and my passion for regenerative agriculture. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sandy.
Thanks, Eliza. Thank you all for joining us. I'm so excited and slightly terrified about doing this presentation this way. I've never talked to an empty room before, so thanks for bearing with us. I was just going to give a little bit of background about TLC, our mission. As Casey read earlier, a really important part of our mission is catalyzing community action and collaboration, and we'll be talking a lot about collaboration as we go. I want to just talk briefly about the ways that we do land conservation. There are 3 ways that we do it. One is that we buy land and own it, and I think, yeah, there we go, and open those as nature preserves. Sometimes we purchase the land and then transfer it to another agency, a government entity normally, to manage and own. And then finally, we do conservation easements where TLC purchases or is donated the development rights, and the landowner still owns the land. And the pictures on the left here are of Maple View Farm, which many people know in Orange County. They are one of our, we hold the easement on their property. I want to talk a little bit about accelerating the pace of conservation. If you've been a member of TLC, you've heard us talk about this. We, in 2018, set up a pretty aggressive goal of doubling the pace of conservation, which for us would mean about 1,000 acres a year. We've managed to do that so far. We'll see what happens with the crisis that's before us. This map shows the 6 counties that we work in. The light green areas are priority areas, generally in watersheds. We have not protected all the land in those areas by any stretch of the imagination. The green dots are conservation projects that we've done, whether they're fee simple or easements. The little pink ones are projects that TLC transferred ownership to. So you might know Turnip Seed Nature Preserve that Wake County has, Raven Rock, Hollow Rock, and Little River Regional Parks are a couple that we've been involved with. And then the orange ones are TLC preserves that are open to the public with 35 miles of hiking and some mountain biking trails. So why do we do conservation? A lot of people think of conservation as protecting land from people. We see it as protecting land for these 4 benefits: for clean water, for connecting people to nature, for protecting natural habitats, and supporting local farms and food. I'll turn it over to Eliza when we get to the local farms and food, but I just wanted to say a little bit more about our work protecting clean water. We work with other land trusts and have protected almost 10,000 acres of land in the Upper Neuse, which is the watershed that provides Raleigh's drinking water. And this pond here is at Williamson Preserve, which we're going to talk about more, and it drains into the Neuse River. We also do land protection to protect natural habitats, and that means things like restoring native plant communities, like longleaf pine, which we are doing at the Williamson Preserve. It's fascinating to me to see the trails going in at Williamson versus the trails at Brumley. The trails at Brumley are on that lovely clay-like soil that really holds the trail surface well, and the reason we can plant longleaf and test that out at Williamson is because there's so much sand in the soil, which does not make for great trails, but I think it's going to be good for the longleaf, I hope. We also do a lot of work on planting native species at Brumley, one of our preserves, several of our preserves across the region. And then we also are working on protecting wildlife corridors between watersheds. That will be a topic for another presentation that we do, I'm sure. Another reason we do land protection is to connect people with nature. This is a photo from our Williamson Preserve, Brumley Preserve. We have built 35 miles of trails across the triangle. And last year, over 1,500 people attended programs on TLC land. Some of them were done by us, some by other people. And Brumley is our most popular preserve. Normally I ask how many people have been there, but I don't really know how to do hand raising through this route. But anyway, it gets about 3,000 visitors a month. And then the last reason that we do land conservation is to support local farms and food. And so we have protected over 5,000 acres of farmland across the triangle, a lot of them in Chatham and Orange counties, easements like Maple View, as well as we have partnered with local farm organizations. In this picture, you'll see Transplanting Traditions Community Farm, which is at TLC's Irvin Farm Preserve. It's not open to the public, but the farm community has their own CSA, and that organization has really expanded in the last 10 years since they've been on the property. We also have another nonprofit on another piece of property that we own, Urban Community Agronomics. And if you're not familiar with those groups, I recommend that you get to know them. They are both doing really great farm work in the community. And one of the great things about my job is that I am not the expert on many topics that we work on. And so I'm really thrilled to have Eliza here to talk about regenerative agriculture and how we are implementing that and hoping to implement that at Williamson Preserve. Eliza?
Awesome. Thank you, Sandy. As Casey mentioned, guys, we will be taking questions towards the end. So please feel free to write in the chat or the Q&A box as we go. We are going to move through this presentation not super quickly, but we do want to leave you guys with enough time at the end for Q&A. So we'll cover a big swath of topics here, and then we've included a number of resources at the end. So jumping right in, we are going to go ahead and define regenerative agriculture for everyone. For some of you, I know this is areas in which you work and you might be familiar, but just to set a precedent here, the way we are defining it, we are defining regenerative agriculture as methods that are a combination of practices. So we're talking about a number of different farming techniques. These are land ethics that we believe are borrowed from both indigenous, organic farmers, conservationists, and ecological designers. So by no means are we saying these are new practices, but they are a wonderful thing that we're bringing to this preserve. Regenerative agriculture builds healthy soils, it protects waterways, increases biodiversity, improves animal and crop health, and of course increases overall farm resilience. So we're going to get into these more in detail, but some of these examples are market gardening, agroforestry, silvopasture, regenerative grazing, and carbon farming. So as my colleagues know, I could probably talk for many hours, which nobody wants, for all of these topics individually, but we're going to cover these as they relate to a broad array of topics and projects at Williamson. So we also like to see regenerative agriculture as a form of what we're calling carbon farming. So there are a number of definitions on carbon farming out there. For a strong precedent, I would recommend folks look at the Project Drawdown resources. If folks are not familiar with this, Project Drawdown is really focused on how we reduce our atmospheric CO2 in order to combat climate change. So I've included a link here specifically for practices like managed grazing. These are wonderful cows that we have out at the Williamson Preserve, and I'll talk about them more in a few slides, but carbon farming is a low tillage, includes low tillage, diverse cover crops, and on-farm fertility, such as manure, to help build carbon-rich soils. So the idea is that we're pulling carbon out of the atmosphere with these farming practices, and we're holding carbon back in the soil. So as you can see from Project Drawdown, soil carbon levels rise from a baseline of 1 to 2% up to 5 to 8% over 10 or more years when these practices in regenerative agriculture are used. And this can add up to 25 to 60 tons of carbon per acre. And I mention that to highlight some of our new and beginning farmers out at Williamson Preserve, Catherine and Jake Newbold. And I say new and beginning because it's new for us to have farmers on this property. Jake and Catherine Newbold have actually been farming for a number of years, and they bring their expertise out to the preserve through a wonderful partnership with the Center for Environmental Farming Systems. So this image I love is right in front of a historic barn that we have on the property. Behind this barn and beautiful walnut tree is 12 acres that Newbold Farm manages and stewards. On the far left in the red shirt here is Lee Menace, who works with CEFS, and George Jones, who's been with us for many years and is now the proud executive director for a local nonprofit, which we're really, really excited about. But this project is a really, really wonderful combination of regenerative farming practices and carbon farming. So here is a lovely picture of Jake and a newborn calf that was just born onto the property. And I believe that Jake and Catherine are with us this evening on the webinar. So again, feel free to throw questions my way at the end and we will try to get to them. But Jake was also recently interviewed along with Catherine in our most recent Confluence newsletter. So if you're interested to hear more, this is just a quick quote from Jake about the benefits of grazing. But the 4 biggest things to know, according to Jake and Catherine, about regenerative farming are to limit tillage, protect the soil, increase biodiversity, and of course, animal grazing to increase that carbon farming opportunity in the soil. And I added this image actually today. I took this image just yesterday. So just to give you guys an example of the pasture in which these lovely cows are grazing, you'll notice here on the right-hand side of the image how green and lush the grasses are. Those were recently grazed just a week ago. And if you'll follow my cursor, right here in the center of the image is electric fencing that Newbold Farm uses to move their cattle. And on the left-hand side is where they've currently grazed and are about to be moved off of that land. So you can see over here on the right how quickly the pasture rebounds thanks to the incredible stewardship and expertise that Newbold Farm brings to the property in moving those cattle every few days. I also want to thank our partners in this through the Center for Environmental Farming Systems. NC Choice is an initiative that brought Jake and Catherine out to the property. In addition to this, and I've thrown a lot of cute cow photos in this image, but I wanted to brag about Newbold Farms, especially for thinking about water quality. Triangle Lane Conservancy works closely with Sound Rivers, which is a nonprofit here in the area that protects the Upper Neuse River watershed and monitors clean water. So we'll be working with them downstream of the property to make sure that all of the practices at the Williamson Preserve are keeping water quality in mind. So on the left-hand side, you can see the water that the cattle use. They're not large open troughs of water, which can often get contaminated both for the animals and for the soil around it. But this is a Mira waterer, which Newbold Farm uses to keep mosquitoes out of the water and also to keep the pasture dry. In addition to that, Jake and Catherine have been kind enough to open up their pastures to a wonderful group that we're working with from Duke University. So these are students that have come out, I guess it's been 6 or 7 times just this past semester to take soil samples and test for soil carbon. So soil carbon is not your typical testing model if you've ever tested your garden soil. It's pretty extensive and it takes a very sophisticated soil lab to process, but we're working closely with them to monitor how much carbon we are capturing in our pastures. And so zooming out a little bit, I want to give you guys an overview of some other areas on the property. The Bailey Sarah Williamson Preserve was purchased in 2013. It's a 405-acre property overall. So the pastures that I just showed you were only 12 acres of this 405-acre parcel. 250 of those acres are in forest, 130 of those are farmland. So traditionally, this property was used for a variety of different farming products and using different techniques, and we hope to continue that into the future. This area is also known as the Walnut Hill Historic District. So the image you see here shows you different barns and silos and farm ponds kind of up here at the top of the image. We are keeping all of these beautiful structures intact, doing a little bit of restoration work, but really honoring these structures as the historic buildings that they are. Eventually, once this property is open to the public, it will connect into the Neuse River Greenway and into the Mountains to Sea Trail. And zooming out just a little bit further, so you can see we've gone from the ground level all the way back out. We want to give you a bit of site context. So the Williamson Preserve is what is part of the Marks Creek Rural Lands Initiative, which is 2,200 acres, right in the heart of Wake and Johnson counties. So as you can see from this map, surrounded by this red boundary is the property that we're calling the Sarah and Bailey Williamson Preserve. But around it is this mosaic of amazing other properties that have been protected. Some of those include Turnip Seed Nature Preserve, which is a project with Wake County, the Clayton Riverwalk, the Neuse River Greenway, which is part of the Mountains to Sea Trail, and then the Clemens Educational State Forest down here in the Southwest. And so that's kind of a broad overview of projects we have on the site, but also kind of the context of the farm itself. I'm now going to transition us into how we thought about this project, starting from when we first purchased the property up to the present day. So we really thought about this project from a variety of different lenses. The goal of the Bailey and Sarah Williamson Preserve is a restorative landscape that connects members of the community to agricultural, historic, and natural resources. So as George Jones used to say, it's a 3-pronged approach. Agriculture, history, and natural resources are really at the heart of what we're doing. So you'll see here in these smaller bubbles, those focus areas. Recreation at the property includes future mountain biking trails and hiking trails, which are being developed. Habitat and restoration efforts, which Sandy talked about with the longleaf pine restoration. Of course, local food and healthy eating, so supporting farmers who are connecting with customers. Nature, education, and stewardship. So we've already engaged a number of schools, and we hope to do more of that to bring farm education to the property. But really what we're going to dive into here for the sake of this evening's talk is the agriculture production and training components of what we're focused on. So to understand these elements that you just saw in this diagram, I really love this image and I thought I would share it with you all this evening. This is one of my favorite barns on the property. There are 7 barns on the property, so it's often hard to choose. But this image can really give you an idea of the different families that have lived in this region, the rich history that goes along with farming in Wake County. You'll notice Oaky Grove Church, which we'll show a few images of in a moment. The town of Shotwell, which is technically where this property is located. Johnson County, which we share a boundary with. Mile and Mile Plantation Roads, which is in reference to the Mile family that once farmed in this area. And then, of course, the Williamson family, which was the most recent family to farm this property. So just to give you guys some context on that, the history has always influenced the way that we see this property. So the land in its entirety, again, is 405 acres. So my cursor is kind of following this large L-shaped boundary. This is what we call an aspect map. As Casey mentioned, I'm in the College of Design at NC State. And this is one of the first things that landscape architects and land designers look at, is the sun exposure of a property, the topography of a property, and the waterways that affect the soil profiles across this land. So just to orient you in the legend here, the light orange indicates farm fields that we've identified with beautiful soils that have a south or a western facing slope. The light green here are generally eastern or northern facing slopes. And then areas that are not highlighted are dense hardwood deciduous forests. So we really tried to analyze this property all the way across the scope of these different elements. And then what we took a next step after that to zoom into the property. This is what we call the northern third. So to orient you again, this road that I'm following with my cursor is the farm entrance. This is the Oaky Grove Historic Church, and the buildings that you saw in the previous image are outlined here in green. So we're going to talk about what some of these colors mean, but I just wanted to give you guys an idea of the different maps and projects that we use when thinking about how we recruit farmers, where we place farmers on the property, and methods that we might use. So for example, we're going to talk in a minute about a practice called keyline design, which is this light green area here. You're probably wondering why there are these strange stripes of trees, and we'll get into that in a moment. But we really are thinking as creatively as we can about best management practices for each of these zones. So that kind of leads us into the final part of this talk, and we have about 10 minutes, just to let you know. We're going to talk now about kind of our farm dreams and aspirations going forward. So at this point, we are thrilled to work with New Bull Farms, and we hope to use them as a model to recruit other farmers to the property. So we're going to talk a little bit about what those dreams might be and how we might utilize them going forward. So we talked a moment ago about keyline design, and agroforestry is a similar practice. Agroforestry is a dream that we have for Williamson that we have not implemented at this point, but this image on the left is actually a screenshot of my property with my family in Durham, North Carolina. So my wife and I have done a number of different projects out here with my parents, which has been a lot of fun, working with a consultant named Mark Shepard. So if folks are interested in keyline design and agroforestry, it's an amazing practice that integrates both trees and shrubs with cropping systems and animal rotations. So you'll notice in this image, these little strips of trees that are cut through by these little areas that we call alleys. So one thing I want to leave you guys with this practice is at Williamson Preserve, we have a number of open fields that can be transitioned into an agroforestry type of farm where we can begin planting trees, planting shrubs, while still grazing in between these systems. On our farm in Durham, we've done the opposite, where we started with a very unhealthy loblolly plantation. So you'll notice at the top part of this image how dense these loblolly pines are, and the native tree canopy is just kind of peeking out on the corners. So we actually thinned this system into a keyline design pattern, going the opposite way. So trying to introduce native plants by allowing more sunlight to hit the pastures and forest floor. So again, I could go on and on about this practice. There are additional resources at the end, but all of that to say that we are working towards that at Williamson. And a big reason we're doing that is because we like to increase the biological activity of soils across the parcel. So agroforestry, keyline design, and rotational grazing are all focused on keeping the soil covered throughout the year, whether that's with trees or shrubs or cover crops. We like to reduce tillage no matter what to keep the soil food web intact, and trying to use as many organic amendments as we can as we practice this regenerative grazing. So the image on the left, I did not create. This is a very famous compost guru, if you can say there are famous compost gurus. If anybody knows Rhonda Sherman at NC State, this is kind of a similar practitioner in the field of compost science. So if you're interested in compost and soil biology, I definitely recommend that you check out Elaine Ingram's work. And there's more of that at the end of the presentation. We also want to promote partnerships. So that's always a farm dream for us. This cheesy photo on the left, I don't know if Sandy knew I was going to include this, but Sandy and I had the opportunity to visit another wonderful organization and land trust in the western part of the state, which is doing a lot of regenerative grazing and farming on their preserves. So the Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy is not an official partner of ours, but we do look to other models that we can pull inspiration from. So using strong partnerships, we would like to recruit additional farmers. We would love to highlight Jake and Catherine as speakers, and then use our community farm as a space for these partners to grow. And throughout all of this, we want to maintain this tie to honoring our regional history. So I want to just mention that we have an ongoing project right now that's not been made public quite yet, but we are working closely with a group out of UNC Chapel Hill called the Community Histories Workshop to dig up as much valuable information as we can on both indigenous communities that have farmed this land, African American communities that have lived in this area and farmed this land, and of course the most recent family members who have lived and worked this property. All of that shapes the way that we see the farm historically and also its use going forward. We would also, on that note, just like to make a special thank you to two of the Williamson family members who have helped us in this protection. So the image on the left is the Oakey Grove Historic Methodist Church. This is actually not part of the Williamson Preserve, but it sits within that same Walnut Hill Historic District. But Betty Brant Williamson and Sally Williamson Greaser have just been instrumental in helping us protect and care for this property. So I've included just a few images here to show you when we first bought the land. This is the pack house, which I'll show you some before and after photos of in a moment. This is the historic barn that greets you at the top of the Williamson Preserve. And you can see that same church here in the background. So this is a historic livestock barn, and this has been a most recent project. So this is what it looked like when we first bought the property. It's absolutely beautiful. It was used for livestock for generations. And thanks to the generous support of donors, we were able to turn it into this beautiful after photo. Usually I work right up in this cute little window because this is now the TLC farm office at the Williamson Preserve. So a lot of our historical narratives will go in this breezeway. This is the inside of the building, and I just want to let everybody know that once this building is open to the public, that we hope to make this a classroom for farmers, obviously a conference room for staff, but also a community space for folks to use. So I'm going to end the presentation with just a few final thoughts on ways to get involved. Of course, we've had to add the later ... part below that as we deal with the coronavirus. But ways that you can get involved going forward would include helping us with trail building at the Williamson Preserve. As Sandy mentioned, these will eventually connect into the Neuse River Greenway. We would love your help volunteering on the farm. So these are two of our wonderful AmeriCorps members leading a volunteer group at the property. And then you can also support us from your home by working with groups like Compost Now to recycle your food waste, which will then come out to the property as finished compost. We also encourage you, after our shelter-in-place methods are lifted, that we could all go out and visit some of these properties more often. So we would love to encourage you and your family to explore both our public nature preserves, but also to reach out to groups like UCAN. This is their beautiful community garden in Durham that Sandy mentioned. And we also just look forward to hosting volunteer work days with you all into the future. So I would like to end with just saying a quick thank you to our collaborators and supporters. We've talked about a few of these folks, New Bowl Farms, of course, Cephs and Sound Rivers, and Duke we mentioned, but we're really working with a huge host of funders and supporters that we couldn't do this work without. That includes our Williamson Preserve Advisory Committee, work with the Wake County and Johnson County, and then of course all of our dedicated volunteers. So at this point, I just want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. Casey will be moderating our Q&A session. So please take a moment to look at the top of your screen. There should be two little chat bubbles that say Q&A. And you're welcome to direct questions to both me or Sandy, and we will try to get them answered. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eliza. That was awesome.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thanks, Eliza and Sandy. So we have a few questions. The first question comes from Smith. Smith wants to know, what was the name of the cow waterer that protects water quality, and where can you get it?
Smith, that is a great question. It's called a Mira fountain, M-I-R-A fountain, and they come in a variety of sizes. If you just Google that, you can buy it directly from the distributor, or you can look at Agri Supply or Tractor Supply, who can source those for you. But they're wonderful for keeping mosquitoes out of your waters, and it also keeps the water cool in the summer.
The next question comes from Chelsea. Eliza, of the regenerative methods that you've listed, is there one in particular that you are most excited about or see the most potential going forward?
Chelsea, I'm so glad to see you're on this talk, and thank you for that question.
That must have been a plan.
It was not planned. It was not planned. Chelsea, thank you for that. I think personally, I get really excited about agroforestry because it works really, really well with both regenerative grazing and carbon farming. I, of course, love to eat fresh produce and love to garden, but I really get excited about large-scale forestry projects that really fit in line with a lot of our TLC missions and visions.
Great. The next two questions come from Noel, asking if you could compare and contrast conventional farming, organic farming, and regenerative farming. And then after that, there's a follow-up question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say the best way I can describe it without talking about farming, which may or may not be helpful, is comparing it to any other supply chain that you can think of. So conventional agriculture, in my opinion, is linear, which means there's a start and an end to the process. So for example, you may plant a corn crop, and put a ton of fertilizer, maybe nitrogen or whatever else into the process. You grow your corn crop, and then you harvest your corn crop. Now, conventional wisdom would have you think that there's nothing wrong with that, but when you look at the soil health at the beginning of that process, and then at the end of that process, once you harvest that crop, you're taking all of those nutrients out of the soil and leaving that soil depleted. So when I say linear, I mean that it has a start and an end. It's a cradle to grave type of model. Whereas regenerative farming and organic farming, I could use those terms somewhat interchangeably, but I see those as cyclical systems, meaning that they're always giving a positive feedback loop to one another. Does that answer your question?
Because this is Sandy, I guess you know that. I was just going to suggest a really fun documentary that I just saw recently that really helped me understand this circular loop that Eliza's talking about. Is called Big Little Farm, and it has, you'll see in it, you'll recognize, they don't talk about keyline, but you'll recognize that in there and some of the other practices, but it gives a good sense of how it's all interconnected and loops around.
That's a great point, Sandy. And those systems work because they mimic nature. So anything in nature that we know of is cyclical. So I think that's a big difference. Thank you for mentioning that, Sandy.
And then the next question that Noel asked is, are there plans to expand the 12 acres devoted to regenerative farming into the rest of the non-forest part of the preserve?
No, that's a great point. Yes, and I should have made that more clear. The mapping process that we are in is almost complete. I would say we're still planning a number of those fields for infrastructure like fencing and for water, which for anybody that's ever dug their own well, you're usually starting at about $10,000 a pop for a new well. So we're really looking to partner with farmers who may be able to work with us on those different parcels, while also thinking about strategic ways to fundraise for those endeavors.
We have a comment from Sammy who says, amazing job, Eliza. You're doing incredible things.
Thank you, Sammy. And I want to make sure that everybody knows I just started this job in the summer. So a lot of what you guys heard tonight is the product of 12 years worth of planning, which is incredible. So I get to geek out with you guys and talk about it, but it's been a huge team effort. But thank you, Sammy.
Lori asks, can you say more about why soil carbon tests are so expensive? And are you testing total C or just organic C? And is it because there's so many different sample sites?
Lori, I want to say too that you're welcome to volunteer with us because I can tell that you already know a lot about this, which is awesome. I am learning as we go with the wonderful soil scientists that we're working with at both Duke and NC State. And just for everybody's understanding, to explain that question, there is above ground soil carbon, which we think of often as held in trees and woody material. And then there is below ground carbon, which is held in soils and roots. So when we're testing for soil carbon, we're looking at something that's, first of all, very hard to find because it's stored at different levels in the soil profile. So that alone makes it just difficult to test and to take good samples. So that just makes it expensive right off the bat. And then it takes a certain type of lab. We're using one at NC State. There's not currently a lab at Duke or UNC that can handle these tests, but they're actually burning the soil sample with heat to see how much burn off is happening with total C, to answer your question. So total soil carbon in that sample. But we're just beginning this project. We're about 4 months into the sampling process. So we'll see what we learn.
Eliza, John would like to know if you could address the economics of rotational grazing, and is there a profit to be made?
John, that's a wonderful question. given that I am not the one grazing the cattle, and Jake and Catherine are grazing the cattle, I don't want to give away or talk too much about any economics on their part, but I will say that compared to conventional farming of cattle, where you're often feeding grain and confining an animal and having to give them water in a traditional capacity, rotational grazing allows you to naturally rebuild soils so that they're eating grasses, a variety of different grasses off of the pasture. So that's really the big cost for most farmers, is that access to land. And then you're really just focusing on making sure that they have a healthy source of water and protective fencing. So otherwise, your upfront costs are not huge. Of course, down the road, as you get larger and larger herds, you need more and more land. But the reason we've made the Williamson Preserve available is to help lower those upfront costs. I hope that starts to answer that question.
Eliza, Caitlin would like to know, what is your favorite part about working as a farm manager? And is there something that you do in your role that might surprise people?
Ooh, Caitlin, thank you so much for that. My favorite part about my job as a farm manager, I think, would just be working outside with all the incredible people that I get to work with. So I've been really, really blessed during this coronavirus to be able to work outdoors and stay in contact with our farmers and partners. But my job is really to help steward this incredible property. Thankfully, Triangle Land Conservancy protects incredible pieces of land that I get to explore and be a part of. So that would probably be my favorite part of the job. Something that is surprising would probably be similar to what Sandy said at the beginning, is that as a farm manager, you're actually never the expert. I think you're not the expert if you're doing it right, because in my role, I'm really looking to the expertise of the other farmers that we work with. So for example, I am learning every day from Jake and Catherine about their specific herd health and the way that they rotate cattle, as I am not the expert on their cows and their practices. So I try to just be a jack of all trades and stay humble as we go.
Sammy asks, what is the area of study of the students from Duke who are assisting you in the carbon soil testing process?
That is a really interesting question, Sammy. And the short answer is that it's a huge, diverse group, actually focused through the Duke Law School. It's a partnership with the Nicholas School for the Environment, for folks that are familiar with Duke. They are trying to be carbon neutral, attempting to be carbon neutral by 2030, I believe, or 35. So they have started this amazing program called the Duke Bass Connections. And you guys will get a copy of this presentation. If you scroll to the end of the presentation, there are a variety of different resources there. One is about the carbon farming piece, but Duke is really, really looking to support different carbon farming initiatives to help them reach that goal. So it's a mix of law students, Nicholas School of the Environment students, soil science students from NC State. It's a huge range, and the class that comes out to work with us is about 15 to 20 students.
Eliza, you received a compliment from Newbold Farms saying that we couldn't do this work without you.
Catherine and Jake, that is very kind. And I'm glad you could join us. I know they have been taking care of baby cows this week, guys. So if you want some cute pictures of baby cows, head on over to our Instagram page where they've been sharing content. But thank you guys for that.
Eliza, those are all the questions that we have. If you could just briefly talk about the cows, once again, the baby calves that were just born, I think that would be a really nice way to end the presentation.
Casey, I'm afraid my audio cut out. Do you mind repeating that for me?
Sure. I was just saying that there were no more questions from the audience. I was just asking if you could talk a little bit about the cows that were born recently.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Thank you guys for bearing with us as our audio's been a bit glitchy tonight. But we have had 2 cows born this week, which is really exciting. We've got 2 more on the way. So to answer the question from earlier, that has definitely been one of my favorite parts of the job. And it's a really, really exciting thing to get to monitor the pasture as those cows are born and figuring out their rotational grazing system with the rest of the herd. So if you're interested, I definitely recommend that folks visit our website and visit the Confluence publication, also available through our social media channels, but you can hear from Jake and Catherine about their experiences there.
Eliza, we've had a couple of other questions come in. Elizabeth says, it sounds like you've been engaged in some exciting silvopasture and alley cropping agroforestry projects. Have you been integrating or plan to integrate food forests as well?
Elizabeth, it's nice to see you're on the chat as well. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names and faces here, so thank you for that. I would say that I've definitely been involved in some exciting silvopasture and agroforestry projects, and from that I've learned how complex this idea of a food forest can be. So for folks that are not familiar, a food forest is generally a much smaller but very diverse system of food crops, ranging from fruit trees to shrubs like blueberries and edible things that are lower to the ground, and then ground cover plantings such as vegetables or strawberries, things of that nature. So I really see silvopasture and agroforestry as just kind of a larger scale version of a food forest. Obviously, when you get to scale and they get to be very large, it's hard to maintain that same level of diversity, but that's been the goal. So implementing that at Williamson, I think, will involve just a variety of different scales of food forests and those different systems.
In the resources that we send out afterwards, there's a little bit about forest farming and the Haw River mushroom group. So you can read a little bit more about it there.
We have just a few more questions. There are 2 questions from Bo. He would like to know, are there plans to expand Williamson Preserve, and how can we help to support TLC in this time of the coronavirus?
Sandy, if you don't mind, I'm going to throw that one to you as the expert in the room.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we have, the plans to expand the preserve are really to build additional trails down on the Clayton Greenway property that folks may have seen on the slide earlier. So we have a grant for that we hope to start construction on sometime in the next year. We are always looking to do more land conservation across the triangle, and particularly in the Marks Creek Historic District. So hopefully we will be doing more land protection. We actually have an farm that is adjacent to the property. And the way that you can support TLC right now is to enjoy our preserves safely, using all of the right CDC recommendations, and renew your membership if you are coming up with your membership being due soon. And if you're not a member of TLC, I invite you to join. As you can see, we have an amazing staff. You'll get to know more of them over the next couple weeks as we do more of these programs. But I will tell you, I was talking to somebody today that a lot of people are talking about how they have all this downtime and whatever, but TLC staff are working really hard to continue our land protection efforts, to continue to work to get our trails open at Williamson, and to maintain the properties that we have across the region. So, as well as to put on programs like this. So I hope you'll join or renew your membership, and really appreciate you all joining us tonight. And thanks to Eliza for a great program. I'm going to clap on behalf of everyone.
Thank you for that, Sandy. Yeah, and I know I've been really enjoying mental health breaks, just getting out to our preserves. So I hope everybody can make some time to get outside and enjoy a lot of the areas that we've protected.
Eliza, we do have one final question in our last over a minute. It's from Ashley, and Ashley asks, do you think it's possible to do silvopasture on a smaller area of land, and how much room do you need to implement it with smaller animals?
And I'm gonna pause for a moment, guys, and say that Ashley Meredith is one of the coolest farm managers that I know. I didn't know you'd be on here, Ashley, but Ashley is a farm manager with the Durham Public School System at their hub farm. So if you have not been to that property and you live in Durham, it's a 33-acre property open to all Durham Public School students. So definitely check that out. Ashley, I would definitely say that silvopasture, this might be confrontational with people who do it at a large scale, but I don't see any reason why you couldn't carry out this same process in your backyard if you're on a small parcel. So as I started the presentation, I grew up farming on a bus. I wouldn't graze animals in a bus, but certainly on a small urban plot in your yard or in a school garden, anything as simple as a few fruit trees and bushes with chickens, I would consider a silvopasture. So silvopasture is just the integration of perennial crops, so something that's growing year after year, and livestock. So that could be rabbits all the way up to cattle. And a lot of folks are doing some creative combinations on that. And if folks are interested, I've also included connections at the end to some local examples at NC State, if you're interested in silvopasture on a large scale and also on a smaller scale. So thank you for that.
Thank you, everyone. This concludes Conservation Conversations, Conservation and Regenerative Agriculture. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and thank you, Sandy and Eliza, for sharing your expertise. Please join us next week for Conservation Conversations, What is Conservation? We will be joined by TLC's Margaret Sands and Caroline Durham. Thank you all so much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and continue to wash your hands. Have a good night.